COBIT 5 specifically. Okay, so I see a lot of people are already familiar with COBIT 5 or actually using COBIT 5. So basically what I'm going to do, I'm not going to bore you to death by doing I'm not going to go through these slides one by one. We're going to try to keep it an open discussion as possible. And to see how COBIT can be used specifically, I mean, we'll give you an idea about COBIT in general, you can use COBIT and how specifically you can tailor COBIT for issues that are concerned to cybersecurity. Okay? Now, COBIT is, of course, the most widely used framework for IT governance. Okay, this is the most widely used framework for IT governance. And simply, you cannot have good, solid enterprise governance without having good, solid governance over your IT. With IT, there are all kinds of risks that your business is exposed to. IT still has to demonstrate value to the organization. Okay, IT has to make sure that we are delivering whatever we deliver with the optimal use of resources, that we are complying with laws and regulations. All of these are aspects of governance. And if I want to summarize governance with two words. Anybody knows what governance is about? Governance. Control. Direction. It's basically two words, direct and control. Direction, of course, has to come from the top, okay? And putting everything in place to make sure that we are achieving whatever we want to achieve, that we are putting measurements in place to make sure that we are achieving this, to detect any deviations so we can take corrective action, to make sure that we are complying with laws and regulations, that we are not doing anything against the law, to have clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities. All of these are aspects of governance, okay? To make sure that you are actually delivering value. And we cannot deliver value for the organization without good, proper IT governance or governance over our IT. The challenge for most CIOs for the past few years, and if you look at all surveys, the top one concern for CIOs, top one concern, all the surveys that have been done, or actually if you look at various surveys, at least one of the top three, it's business IT alignment. We still have this disconnect between business and IT, like they are two separate entities. IT has to be more than infrastructure management. It has to be elevated to become a strategic partner for the business. IT exists for one reason. One and only one reason. There is no other reasons for the existence of IT, which is business. Serve the needs of the business. Support the needs of the business. There is no other reason for the existence of IT. And this is where IT has to be elevated to become more than just simply infrastructure management. It's not about routers, switches, that's not what IT is about. It has to become a strategic partner for the business, okay? And of course, in many organizations, IT is still treated as a black box. We throw money and we don't know what we're getting out of it. And in many organizations, the IT manager still reports to the CFO because IT is simply looked at as a cost center. That is happening 30, 40% of the organizations where your IT manager is still reporting to your CFO. I don't know about your organizations, but basically that is still dominant in many organizations. So how do we change this? How do we make sure that IT is not just simply supporting the business, but IT is becoming more and more integrated within the business? I mean, you cannot now distinguish between a business process and an IT service. They are more and more integrated. And this is why we really need to have proper governance over our IT. And one such framework for governance is basically COBIT 5. I'm not going to go through these slides. These will be available for you after the summit. Okay, this is basically about the needs of governance. Governance is all about governance, risk, compliance. Now it's being put all under one umbrella. So those are just some definitions that I will just skip through because we only have 1 hour and I don't want to bore you to death after lunch with this. And the thing with governance is you don't just wake up one day and decide, okay, let's do the governance today. It doesn't work this way. It has to become part of the everyday life of the organization. You have to build a framework for it. Complete framework from top to bottom. Remember, direct and control. And one of such these frameworks is basically COBITs. Okay? COBIT, by the way, anybody knows what COBIT stands for, other than the people that have taken COBIT training, other than these, because I assume you also already passed your foundation exam. What does COBIT stand for? Control, objectives for information and related technology. It's control, actually it stood for control objectives for information and related technology. The underlying premise for COBIT is that business needs information. That's why we call it information technology. That's why we call it the information age. It's all about information. And for this information to be useful to the business, it has to meet certain requirements. It's all about information. Wherever that information is stored, whatever the medium that is stored, it's all about information. So actually, COBIT stood for Control Objectives for Information and Related Technology. In prior versions of COBIT, before COBIT 5 was launched in 2012, we had something called Control Objectives. These don't exist anymore with COBIT 5. But simply, they still call it COBIT because the brand is well known. So now COBIT stands for COBITs. Okay? COBIT is developed by ISACA, Information Systems Audit and Control Association, a nonprofit organization based in the US, in Illinois. They have about 115,000, 110,000 members worldwide. And they do prolific research regarding the fields of governance, security, risk, and so on. So what happened over the years, ISACA developed many frameworks. They developed COBIT for control. They developed Risk IT, which focuses, as the name indicates, on risk. They developed Val IT, which is an extension of COBIT focusing on value. They developed BMIS, specifically for information security. ITAF, for IT Assurance Framework. All of these frameworks have been developed over the year. So what they did with COBIT 5, they integrated all of these sources of information into a single framework, which is COBIT 5. So there is something in COBIT for everybody. Many people think, yeah, it's an audit framework. Yeah, there is something in it for auditor. Many people think it's for IT only, which is not right, because if you look at COBIT itself, which, by the way, you can download freely from the ISACA website, the name of the framework, first and foremost, it's a business framework. It's not an IT framework. It is a business framework for the governance as well as management of IT. By the way, any ISACA members here? So we have some ISACA members. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself regarding these topics. Yep. And I would strongly encourage you to go and visit their site. They have a new initiative on cybersecurity. It's called Cybersecurity Nexus, which helps align with NIST and all of these other initiatives that we have been talking about. I'm sure they have a chapter here in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia. So definitely get ISACA membership. I'm not getting any commissions out of this. It is a very beneficial membership. And to be honest, personally, I do a lot of training and consulting. It's the most beneficial membership I have. I don't know if you share the same opinion with me, but definitely you'll get a lot of resources that will save you time, effort, and so on. Okay? So over the years, COBIT has been developed by ISACA to tie all of these other frameworks as well as other sources of knowledge into a single integrated framework. This framework also maps or actually better aligns with other standards, frameworks, best practices, with ISO 27000 for information security, with ITIL, ISO 20000 for service management, TOGAF for enterprise architecture, MOR for risk management, ISO 31000. So it ties better with all of these other standards, frameworks, and best practices. Okay? So this is basically how COBIT evolved over the years. In COBIT in 2012, COBIT 5 was finally released, which was a quantum leap from COBIT 4.1. Okay, so this is basically the evolution of COBIT. It's basically started as an audit framework. Now it is an enterprise governance framework. So it's not just for IT. there is something in it for everybody, regardless of your industry, whether you're a governmental organization, whether you're private, whether you're big, you're small, financial, oil and gas, whatever your organization is, there is something for you in COBITs. Okay? Actually, I think one of the biggest implementations in the region has been by STC, the Saudi telecom company, I think. They implemented all 34 COBIT processes at the time, the 34 COBIT 4.1 processes. That was one of the biggest implementation in the regions. In other parts of the world, it has been, the use of COBIT has been mandated by law. If you go to Turkey, the central bank in Turkey requires the use of COBITs. So it has been mandated in Dubai. If you go to the financial department in Dubai, of the government of Dubai, all IT departments are audited according to COBIT. So there is something in it for everybody. And we're seeing more and more growth and demand for COBIT in the region. Okay? So basically, there are certain advantages of using COBIT. There's something in it for business, something in it for IT, for security people, for audit people. So everybody is using the same framework. It is creating a common ground, a common language between these different groups within, or stakeholders within the organization. It's being used by regulators and so on. So COBIT 5, basically, there are many more publications that have been created, and we'll take a look at the COBIT 5 product family. It's based on 5 principles and 7 enablers. Those are the main components of COBIT. The 5 principles, as well as the 7 enablers, and this is what we are going to be looking at next. Okay? This is the COBIT 5 product family. So they created this single framework, which is COBIT 5. Out of this framework, they started creating specialist guides for auditors, for information security, for risk, specialized guidance, for implementation, for doing assessments, all based on a single framework. And they start creating even more specialist guides for enablers, enabling information, enabling processes, and there is, of course, an online version of COBITs. So it is a huge product family, and it is growing constantly. Okay, so basically there is something in it for everybody. Okay, and this is it is supported, of course, by a training map. 2 further trainings were announced last month regarding security. One of them is for NIST. The other one, I can't remember what it is. So there is certification that is available for COBIT. Foundation certification, assessor, implementation. So there is accredited certification that is available for COBITs. Any questions so far before we get into the principles? The 5 COBIT principles? Yes?
What's the typical time frame to implement COBIT for a medium-sized organization?
I'll give you the consultant's answer. It depends. I mean, if you look at implementation, what are some of the aspects that you would look at? You're going to look at your resources, their workload of the resources, the culture of the organization, the objectives of the organization, the legal environment of the organization. That's why it depends. Depends on the processes that you have selected, the current maturity of the organization. So no 2 organizations are alike. Okay, that's why, yes, but even for implementation, there is practical guidance. There's the implementation guide that will take you step by step how to do this kind of implementation. So basically it depends, but you're going to do it in a cyclical approach, and each cycle is recommended not to exceed 6 months. More than 6 months, you need to lose momentum. Less than 6 months, again, depending on what you have selected to implement. So basically it depends. We got a request from one of the ministries in Saudi Arabia. They already put out an RFP for COBIT implementation, or actually for governance framework based on COBIT, a 2-layer approach. And their time frame for this is 3 years. So basically, it just depends. Okay, the first year is actually about the implementation, and the second 2 more years is about actual operation of the offices that will be established for governance offices. So it just depends. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. I know it doesn't. You would like to have a time frame, but it just. It's a diplomatic answer. Not 2 organizations are alike. Not 2 organizations are alike. Any other questions before we get into the principles? The COBIT 5 principles. Okay. COBIT is based on 5 principles. Okay? 5 principles. Principle 1, meeting stakeholder needs. Okay? Principle 2, covering the enterprise end-to-end. Principle 3, applying a single integrated framework. Principle 4, enabling a holistic approach. And principle 5, which is separating governance from management. Those are the 5 principles that we have in COBIT 5. And let's look briefly at what these principles mean. Okay? The first one, okay? Meeting stakeholder needs. Organizations exist for one reason, which is basically all about delivering value for these different stakeholders, creating value for the stakeholders. Stakeholders may be internal, may be external. They have conflicting interests. Sometimes they may have conflicting interests. Okay? Regulators are stakeholders. Users are stakeholders. Security people, professionals are stakeholders. Users, they want the most advanced, most up-to-date, the fastest, the best. Customers paying for the service, they want the cheapest. How do you manage this conflict between these different stakeholders? So you need to make sure that you are creating value for these stakeholders, and this value is created by realizing benefits, and these benefits are realized through the optimum use of resources and making sure that risk is optimized. These are the 3 elements of creating value for organization. And if we look at these 3 from the context of cybersecurity, you can actually start to see how cybersecurity fits within all of these 3. Lack of security, what will it do to benefits? Diminish benefits, or benefits may not be realized. From a risk perspective, okay, you can also look at it from all kinds of aspects. Resource optimization. Yes, I want to have cost-effective cybersecurity measures in place, cost-effective. So even these can be applied from within the context of cybersecurity. Okay? So basically, governance is all about negotiating the needs of these different stakeholders, understanding what these stakeholders want, choosing among possible options, and giving in turn direction to management for management to execute. This is what governance is about. Okay? Now, the nice thing about COBIT, okay, is we talk about business IT alignment and meeting the needs of the stakeholders. In COBIT, they give you guidance how to actually do this, to align business and IT from top to bottom. And this is done through what we call the goals cascade. Okay? The goals cascade. And in the goals cascade, basically, these stakeholder needs, okay, will be mapped to a set of enterprise goals. The enterprise goals are then mapped to a set of IT goals. And the IT goals are in turn mapped to a set of enabler goals, or specifically process goals. Okay, so it's not just empty words. And the nice thing about COBIT, it also gives you the guidance about these goals. The goals cascade is very important because it helps you decide how you're going to implement, how you're going to prioritize. This is an example of the goals cascade as defined by COBIT. On top, I know this is not clear. Usually I like to have the computer here in front of me and switching between presentations, but that's not possible. Basically here, we have a set of 17 goals, enterprise goals. Through research, ISACA has determined that these are the most popular or most important goals for organizations across industries, across geographies, big, small, public, private. These are the common goals for organization. Okay, of course, this is not a prioritized list. This is not an exhaustive list. So they have done this research, and this research was validated by industry leaders. In turn, within the same research, they came up with a set of 17 IT-related goals, 17 of them. Again, this is not a comprehensive list. This is not a prioritized list. What's important for you is not the same, has the same priority for other organizations. What was the next logical step is that they actually mapped these goals. They mapped these goals. So basically, if you have a goal number, I cannot see them here clearly, goal number 8, which is basically, I don't know, align something here, okay? And you want to achieve this enterprise goal, then maybe you should consider this alignment of IT and business strategy as a primary goal. Okay, the P stands for primary, S stands for secondary. Okay, P, this one is primary, you should consider this goal, and so on. This mapping is, of course, very powerful, okay, and very simplistic. There is a structured way that you can use this. What we need to keep in mind that this is simply recommendation. COBIT is not a standard. It is simply a framework, guidance, no more, no less. It is not a standard, it's simply guidance, okay? So as such, organizations cannot be COBIT certified, okay? Organizations get certified against standards. There is a standard for IT governance, which is ISO 38500, which again maps to these COBIT principles. So even these mappings are guidance. Okay, so, but these mappings are very powerful. Then the next step was basically to do what? To map these IT goals with IT processes. COBIT has 37 processes, which we'll take a brief look at. So these IT goals are then in turn mapped to the COBIT processes. So basically what are we doing here? We're building a governance framework from top to bottom, starting from the needs of the stakeholders, mapped to enterprise goals, mapped to IT-related goals, in turn mapped to processes. So the entire governance framework is being built from top to bottom, along with measurements all the way, have clearly defined roles and responsibilities here. So we are building an entire governance framework from top to bottom. Okay, so this is basically how COBIT meets stakeholder needs. And all of these, of course, are documented in the COBIT framework itself. And you can notice also that these goals are distributed along the 4 perspectives of a balanced scorecard. Okay, so very powerful, very useful mappings, actually. Okay. Any questions about the mappings so far? Okay, so the second principle, covering the enterprise end-to-end. Okay? COBIT basically contains all the functions, processes that will enable you to bring governance of enterprise IT within the overall governance framework of the organization. So it is not something that is being done separately. It brings governance of enterprise IT within the overall enterprise-wide governance framework. Okay? And you'll be surprised to see that most of the responsibilities, or actually many, about 40% of responsibilities and accountabilities within COBIT 5 are not within IT, but rather within the business. More than 40%, which is surprising because many people think it's an IT thing. It is not. Okay? So even here at different levels, we have different roles and responsibilities in any organization. Okay? You take, for instance, a bank that is publicly listed. You'll have the different owners and stakeholders, which will elect a board of directors, the governing body. What does the board of directors do? Board of directors, what do? Yeah. They do nothing, basically. They sit down, smoke cigars, come up with strategies, give direction. They don't do any work. They give this kind of guidance. They meet 4 times a year, get good remuneration for it, and that's it. That's what the board of directors does, gives guidance. They give guidance to who? To management, which management, of course, will, down the chain of command, instruct and align the resources of the organization. So operations will report back to management. Management, the performance of management is monitored by the governing body, and the governing body is, of course, accountable towards the owners and the stakeholders, the different shareholders. So basically, there are different roles and responsibilities at all levels. Okay? And all of these are defined. Okay? Now, principle 3 is very important and will be interesting to many of you that are attending this session. In many organizations, okay, you're using a variety of frameworks. Yeah, we have ISO 9000 over here. We have ISO 20000 here. We're using ISO 27000 for information security. We have a PMO that is using PMBOK or that's using Prince2, whatever. Okay? How do we make sure that we can integrate all of these together? Okay? And this is actually one of the strong points of COBIT 5, which is applying a single integrated framework. COBIT 5 or COBIT is sometimes called an umbrella framework. It is a high-level framework that can be used for the integration of all of these other standards, frameworks, and best practices. COBIT tells you that you need to manage incidents. It doesn't tell you how. Okay? It will give you a set of things that you need to achieve. As long as you are doing them, that's fine. Whether you develop your own procedures, whether you develop your own processes, that's fine. Or you can look for other guidance, for instance, to manage incidents, as you have an ITIL or ISO 20000 or 27000 for information security. So it can be used as a high-level framework for the integration of all of these other standards, frameworks, and best practices. TOGAF for enterprise architecture, and so on. And this is one of the strong points of using COBITs. Okay? So again, one framework, and based on these, they have all kinds of guidance for others, for whatever you need, for assurance, for security, for risk, all of these under one framework. Okay? So this is the COBIT integrator model. One framework out of this, you can use it to map to all other kinds of frameworks. And this is some kind of mapping between COBIT and other processes. These rectangles are actually the COBIT domains, which we'll see a little bit later. Okay? And this is where COBIT fits. Under COBIT, you can use it to manage all other standards, frameworks, and best practices. Okay? Now, the fourth enabler is very important also, enabling a holistic approach. Okay? Remember when we talk about capacity building, we were talking about setting it within a whole governance framework. Yes, tools are important, but if I don't have the right people to manage these tools, my governance framework is going to be shaky. If I don't have the processes in place, okay, I need, people, processes, technology. Things are not going to work because I need to have clearly defined roles and responsibilities. What about the culture of the organization? That has to be taken into consideration. All of these, what if I don't have policies in place? All of these elements have to be taken into consideration. So we don't just focus on one area, we focus on all of these 7 enablers as identified by COBIT 5. And if you look at these, those are the 7 what we call enablers. An enabler is something that will enable governance. The lack of these enablers may weaken our governance framework. It is a very comprehensive framework. Enabler number 1, principles, policies, and frameworks. I need to have policies in place. What happens if we don't have policies? Okay? And of course, to execute the most important vehicle for the execution of these policies, processes, organizational structures, culture, ethics, and behavior, people skills and competencies, service infrastructure and applications, and information. Those are the 7 COBIT enablers. And as you can see, this is a very comprehensive approach to manage our governance framework. And of course, people, skills, and competencies, our prior topic fits right there. Okay, capacity building. Now so basically it focuses on all of these things. Any questions so far about these enablers? Because if you look at this, you'll see, okay, that's a little bit intimidating. I have to consider all of these things. That's too much to think about. But think about COBIT this way. It's like a supermarket. You go into a supermarket, it has everything that you need, but you're not going to get everything at the same time. You're going to go in there and look at what you need and take it. That's how you should think about COBIT, because it is so extensive. It's like a supermarket or a department store. You have to get what you need out of it. Okay, when it first came out, okay, we've been using COBIT 4.1 for years. You think, yeah, it's trying to do too much. And I actually hated it when it first came out, because we've been using 4.1. It's simple, it's straightforward. I don't need to worry about these things. But the more you get involved in it, the more you will realize that it actually makes sense to look at all of these aspects together. Okay, you can be very creative with it. Okay, I want to implement these processes. What kind of skills do I require? What kind of tools do I require to support the processes? That's another enabler. What's the culture in the organization? Culture, are people more likely to follow the processes or not? If they're not, I need more control in the process. I need the policies for the processes. If that's what you're following, a process-centric approach for implementation. So you can be really very creative with it. Okay? And our fifth principle is separating governance from management. In COBIT 5, there's a clear separation between governance and management. The roles and responsibilities are different. The activities they perform is different. And this difference in activities is evident in the COBIT PRM, the Process Reference Model. Governance is all about, they perform what we call evaluate, direct, and monitor. EDM, evaluate, direct, monitor. Those are the kind of activities that are performed as part of governance. Whereas management will take this direction from governance, and they will perform what we call plan, build, run, monitor, PBRM. That's what management does. And these kinds of activities are reflected in the COBIT Process Reference Model. In COBIT 5, we have 5 domains. 5 domains. 1 governance domain called the EDM domain, and 4 management domains that are in line with the activities plan, build, run, monitor. Okay? So these are the activities that are performed, and this is the COBIT 5 Process Reference Model. Okay? This on top is the governance domain, EDM, evaluate, direct, and monitor. 5 processes there. And we have 4 management domains. We have align, plan, and organize, build, acquire, and implement, deliver service and support, and monitor, evaluate, and assess. In total, 37 processes. Of course, not all processes are of the same importance. Each organization will determine which processes are relevant for them. It doesn't mean that you're going to implement all these 37 processes. These processes are, again, mapped to the IT goals. So you can select which ones are relevant for you. These can be combined. You can separate processes into further processes. But if you look at some of these processes, you will see how extensive the coverage of COBIT is and how relevant it is specifically for our topic today, which is cybersecurity. For instance, managed security. Okay? That's a separate process by itself. Okay? Manage changes. Okay? Manage what is continuity. Okay? Manage continuity, which is related to security. So now they are all being managed under a single framework, which is COBIT 5. Okay? And if you look at some of the processes, manage human resources, manage budgets and costs. Again, it depends. You have to select what is relevant for you, which I think is very powerful. Just by looking at this model, you can really understand how extensive COBIT is and how extensive in the coverage these COBIT processes are. Okay? And we have this clear separation between governance and management. Any questions so far? Any questions? Yes.
Just wanted to be clear on this manage human resources.
Yes.
Is it focused on IT services or is it business-wide?
No, here, and this is an interesting topic, it focuses on the IT framework. It focuses, when we talk about budgets and costs, that's for IT, which maps, for instance, for the ITIL process, financial management. Okay, so specifically here it's talking about IT. But again, the key thing is business IT alignment. If you look at the many of the roles and responsibilities here in these processes, or the accountabilities, they will go all the way up to the board level. These 37 processes, by the way, are described in detail. Each and every process are described in detail in COBIT, in a guide, separate guide. It's called Enabling Processes. So they'll give you in detail the activities that are performed, the inputs, the outputs, all of these are described in detail for these. The interfaces between the processes, all of these are described in detail. Okay? But again, the focus is not just the processes. Yet you have to have a comprehensive approach for governance. Okay? Any questions? Any other questions? Okay. So basically, those are the 5 COBIT principles in short. Okay. Now, let's look at the 7 COBIT enablers. Again, I'll try to make it brief and try to see what's the purpose of each one of these enablers, and then we'll take a look at and see how they apply to cybersecurity from a cybersecurity perspective. These, as we said, principle 4, looking at all of these enablers, the 7 enablers, in order to be able to enable governance. And of course, these also work with each other. Okay, for instance, if we look at this enabler, principles, policies, and frameworks, the most important vehicle for executing policies are processes themselves. Everything that you're going to do afterwards has to be in line with these policies. Okay? And the creative part that actually Isaka did with these enablers, if you look at the 7 enablers, you'll see that their nature is different. People skills and competencies is totally different than culture, ethics, and behavior. It's totally different than information. It's totally different than principles, policies, and frameworks. However, they have something in common. 4 things in common, actually, which is what we call enabler dimensions. These enabler dimensions are common to all enablers. So you can think about these enabler dimensions as a dashboard or as a management tool to manage the performance of each and every one of these enablers. Each and every enabler will have different stakeholders, whatever the enabler is. Information has stakeholders. Processes have stakeholders. Policies, principles, policies, and frameworks has stakeholders. Each one of these has goals, different types of goals. Each one of these has a life cycle. Information has a life cycle. Processes have a life cycle. People have a life cycle. Each and every one of these enablers has good practices. If we follow these good practices for this particular enablers, we're more likely to succeed. So these enablers are actually a very innovative way to manage these enabler dimensions. Mm-hmm. Now the first one is, of course, principles, policies, and frameworks. Okay? Principles, policies, and frameworks is all about to convey the intentions of management, the rules of the organization. What happens if you don't have any policies in place? What happens? No policies. Chaos. Nobody knows what to do. Okay? So basically, of course, there's a difference between principles and policies. Principles, you need to keep them limited in number. Do no harm, be good to the environment, serve the community, whatever. Whereas policies are detailed guidance of how to put these principles into action. What if you don't have an information security policy? What happens? What if you don't have a cyber security policy within your information security policy? What happens? Mm-hmm.
How could we do it?
Yep, total chaos. Yeah. Basically, yeah, that's what's going to happen. Okay? So everything that you're going to do afterwards has to fit within these principles, policies, and framework enabler. Processes, as we have seen, 37 processes across 5 different domains. Not all processes are of the same importance. You have to select which ones are relevant for you. Okay, as you said, you need to combine. You may combine processes or separate processes, depending on the perspective that you are looking at. You look at capacity and availability. In COBIT, they are combined into a single process. Okay, you take it from an ITIL perspective, they're separate, capacity and availability. You take it from an ISO 20000 perspective, they combine availability and continuity. Which one is right? They're all right. So again, I'll give you the consultant's answer. It depends. They're all right, depending on what you want to do. Here, manage incidents and service requests, one process. ITIL separates them. ISO 20000 combines them. Which one is right? Depends on your organization. What's right for your organization? So those are the 37 processes Okay, the COBIT 37 processes. All of these are described in detail in separate publication, the enabling processes. For each process, they will give a description, the purpose, the IT goals that's supporting, metrics, process goals, metrics for these goals, practices, detailed RACI charts. And this is very important for setting roles and responsibilities. They will have detailed RACI charts. Again, keep things in mind. These are simply recommendations, guidance, best practices. No more, no less. You have to take this guidance, use what is suitable for your organization. Okay? This is the COBIT definition of what a process is, process, practices, activities, inputs, outputs, and so on. Okay? Enable 3, organizational structures. Again, you have to have the right organizational structures. If you're going to implement change management process in your organization, you're going to have a CAB. What does the CAB do? How frequently do they meet? How do you keep minutes of their meetings? What's their span of control, limit of authority? All of this has to be described or documented for all of these different organizational structures that you have in your organization, starting from the boards and all the way down. And COBIT actually gives you some kind of guidance about these organizational structures. You may not have all of these in your organizations, you may have different namings, but you may have somebody that's actually doing the role of these organizational structures. Okay? So those are different organizational structures. Fourth one is very important. Culture, ethics, and behavior. And you can see how this is relevant specifically for cybersecurity. Okay? Culture, ethics, and behavior is very important. We talked about the importance of awareness. I mean, you have to teach your employees the ability to say no. If somebody asks them, give me your username and password, I need to use them. They have to know, well, to be able to say no. Because it's not just a matter of trust, it's a matter of accountability. If something goes wrong, somebody is going to be accountable. You have 20 users using the single username and password. What if you fire one of them? How much damage can they do in 5 minutes before you are able to change the password? In 5 minutes. How much information can they copy on a USB stick that's worth 10 riyals or 10 dirhams? How much information? In these 5 minutes. Okay. So it is all about culture. Remember, even in cybersecurity, a culture of the organization will affect the way you implement these cybersecurity measures. It will be affected. You have to take into consideration when you are implementing this governance framework, and the culture of the organization will be affected if there are any significant cybersecurity threats or any incidents that have affected the organization, security incidents that have affected the organization. The failure of many of these initiatives happens because of these: culture, ethics, and behavior. So actually, again, COBIT gives you some guidance how to influence the behavior, how to prevent undesired behavior. It gives you all this kind of guidance here, which is something that you really have to take into consideration. Okay? Information, our other important enabler. Number 5. Remember, the whole premise for developing COBIT is that business needs information. Okay, that's why, again, as I said, we call it information technology. It's called the information age. And this information, of course, needs to meet certain criteria. This need for business, for information, is what drives the information to invest in IT in the first place. This information, of course, needs to meet certain criteria. This model was introduced in COBIT 4.1. In 5, they elaborated much more on this. That's why I still included this model from COBIT 4.1. Information had to meet these criteria. Sometimes they were called business requirements for information or information criteria in terms of effectiveness, efficiency, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which are the security elements, and compliance and reliability. In COBIT 5, okay, they actually came up with a more detailed model for information, which is described in a separate publication. It's called Enabling Information. And they came up with a layered model, 6 layers for information, starting from the physical layer all the way going up to what we call the social layer. And this model actually is very useful because the need for encryption, for instance, at the physical layer is totally different at higher levels. So it is a very useful model that they invented actually or developed as part of COBIT 5. Okay? So basically, this is the 5th enabler. 6 enabler services, infrastructure, and applications. Again, you need the tools, basically, to support whatever services that you are offering. You need the tools to provide you with the information that you have. So there are certain guidance that you can use underneath COBIT to help you manage this particular enabler. To manage services, for instance, you can use ITIL, which is a framework for service management. You can use ISO 20000. For infrastructure and whatever, you can use TOGAF for enterprise architecture underneath COBIT. So again, it can be used as an umbrella framework for all of these enablers. So you can use these other frameworks, you can use them to support this particular enabler. And the 7th one, which brings us back to our topic that we were discussing earlier about capacity building. People, skills, and competencies. Okay? Again, if you take a look at the COBIT domains, the processes, align, plan, and organize. And we have deliver, service, and support domain. Align, plan, and organize, that's a high-level domain. Okay? Deliver, service, and support, that's a low-level domain where you are doing operations. Would you expect to need the same skills at both levels? High level, I need planning, budgeting, portfolio management. Deliver, service, and support, I need different types of skills. I need incident management skills, problem management skills, customer service skills. This is what I need at deliver, service, and support. You're talking about processes. I want to implement processes. With processes, I'm going to have process managers, process owners. I'm going to have a service level manager for service level management. I'm going to have a change manager for change management. I need to have a problem manager for problem management. Do they need to have the same skills? They are totally different skills. The skills that you will require for a service level manager are totally different than the skills that you would require for a problem manager. For a problem manager, I need to have good analytical skills, knowledge of the problem management techniques. For service level management, I need to have good negotiation skills. For a change manager, I need to have conflict resolution skills. You're going to have immense conflicts on your CAB meetings, and your change manager is going to manage this CAB. How do we make sure that we are getting the right skills at the right levels? And this is very important here. That's why we talked about capacity building. It has to be at the right levels. The needs for security at the higher levels for a manager or for a board member are totally different than the needs at the lower level. So all of these have to be addressed specifically. You have to take into consideration the learning styles of individuals. It's not just creating awareness PowerPoint, put it on the website, or use SharePoint or whatever. Different styles. Some people will learn by practicing. Others will learn by reading, by doing. So all of these have to be taken into consideration. So basically, this is our last enabler, which is people, skills, and competencies. It is not just a numbers game. You hire somebody fresh out of college. You start sending them to all kinds of technical training. Yeah, go attend some Oracle training, some Cisco training, some Microsoft training, whatever. 2-3 years down the roads, they have different responsibilities. Now you need them to lead teams. You need them to be able to manage projects, to develop some kind of budgets. The skills that they have acquired before are not sufficient anymore. How do we make sure that these skills are constant with their development? And there are actually frameworks for this that will help you develop these skills. One of these frameworks, which I strongly encourage you to take a look at, is the SOFIA framework, SFIA, Skills Framework for the Information Age, which is available from the SOFIA organization in the UK. I strongly encourage you to download this framework. It helps in developing, in doing skills assessment, skills gap analysis, developing training program. It's a very flexible framework. Okay? So that's why we talk about capacity building. That's why I mentioned do it within the overall governance framework of the organization. That is not something separate from the organization. So basically, those are the 7 enablers that we have in COBIT 5. Any questions so far? How much time do I have? Not much time. Yes? 4 more minutes. You had a question, or you were just telling me the time? Okay. You have a question. In the cloud specifically. Yes.
Important topic.
Yes.
Plus, in the enabler, in the fifth enabler regarding the information.
Yes.
Can you please brief how COBIT 5 can help us to make information classifications?
Okay. If we look at the information model, first of all, to answer the information model that COBIT has come up with, the way I like to liken this model. Do you have a technical background? OSI model of a network? You still remember the OSI model of a network? All the way from the physical, how many layers? 7 physical, all the way up to the application layer. What's happening at each layer? Different things are happening at each layer. The importance of this model is, if you're using, for instance, Internet Explorer or any application, it doesn't matter to you if you're connected wireless or if you're connected through Ethernet. It's creating this separation. It enables interoperability between different vendors. If you buy a layer 3 switch from this vendor and a layer 3 switch from this vendor, you know that these switches will work together. The information model in COBIT 5 is very similar to this model. Okay? You have the physical layer. Basically, okay, it's all about information. Where is this information stored? Is it stored on paper or is it stored electronically? Okay, what are the symbols that we are using to store this information? Are we using Arabic letters? Are we using English letters? Okay, good, so we're using English letters. What are the rules to combine these letters into words? The words into sentences. What do these sentences mean? Are these sentences actual contracts? Do they represent a financial statement? This is basically what's happening in the information model. So basically having this model helps you classify the security needs related or encryption needs, protection layers at different levels. For instance, the way you will protect information at the physical layer is different, for instance, determining the retention requirements for information. I don't care if it's stored on paper or electronically, I need you to retain it for 6 years. So it helps you define this information at different layers. It can be used in so many different ways. Now, this is a new model. It hasn't been used before, by the way. They just created it, and they are proposing ways that it can be used. But it actually makes sense. Once you look at the model, it starts to make sense. Okay? So as I said, you can download this particular document. It's called Enabling Information. And what was your second question? Cloud-based. Actually, there are. Now, what happened with COBIT, I don't think I will have time for this, but this is actually one area we would look into. They created COBIT. And they created these 37, they developed COBIT and these 37 processes. There's a document called COBIT for Information Security, which focuses specifically about information security. Okay, there are several processes that are related to information security. Access management, managing information security, continuity, availability, all are related to information security. Suppliers, managing suppliers, there is managing change, all of these are actually related to information security. Out of this, they developed a special document specifically for cybersecurity. Within this, you have cloud. So cybersecurity, it's called actually either the cybersecurity nexus, that's one of them, or you can take a look at, actually it's the same name, the same document. It's cybersecurity nexus. You can download it from the ISACA website. Okay, so, and you have seen each one of these enablers. What I have in the presentation actually is the application, how COBIT applies within a cybersecurity environment. Briefly, okay? For instance, these are the COBIT principles and how they apply for a cybersecurity environment. What kind of policies are required for a cybersecurity environment? How do the processes apply for cybersecurity? So they have taken these and defined the 7 enablers from a cybersecurity perspective. So it is already defined. I don't think we will have time for this, but it will be part of your presentation. I have included some of these. So for instance, applying a single integrated framework. That's one of the principles I chose here. Within this framework, you can use specialized framework for information security. 27,000, NIST, they've been mentioning NIST and so on. Okay, 27032, specifically for cybersecurity. You can use it all within COBITs. So of course, you can have to start mapping these to COBITs. Okay? But these are already there. And of course, here, managing cybersecurity, we have to take an overall perspective. That's why I said, do it within a governance framework. COBIT is really an eye-opener regarding this particular application. That's why I'm really enthusiastic about COBIT, and the demand that we have seen for it over the past couple of years has been just amazing. From all kinds of organizations, banking, oil and gas, government, they're seriously considering COBIT because it actually makes sense. With this, I think I will have to stop. But the rest of this, I have talked about the COBIT principles, the enablers. In this particular section, the specific application for these enablers for cybersecurity. I've had samples for these principles, policy frameworks, all of these 7 enablers, and how they fit actually within the realm of cybersecurity, which we sort of didn't have time to cover. My apologies for going over time.
Thank you very much. Let's put our hands together for now.
Thank you.
Governance is a very important component of how we should manage information and how we should maintain information and deliver information to the intended, because information flows within the organization, it flows into the organization, and it flows out of the organization. How do you govern this whole domain? I think COBIT is a good solid framework to take it, to organize and synchronize and control what information do you need, not only how the information is treated, but what information is important for you and what is not. You need to regard various forms of information differently. Otherwise, it will be a nightmare of how to consider everything in the organization. One of the important components that you mentioned, Nasser, is basically the classification of data. So you can classify your data as public, and that's one of the implementations I made using COBIT framework. Whether this is public information, whether this is, confidential information, or whether it is classified information. If it is classified, normally only leadership would look at it, and very specific number of people who have authority to look at intentions of this organization. And confidential information is normally within a certain project, within a certain department, within a certain type of activity. And public is public. I mean, public information is whatever you can publish on Facebook or LinkedIn or on your portal, and so on. So once you classify your data correctly, the rest becomes naturally certain tendencies on how to position it, how to secure it, how to allow access to it, and so on. It's a beautiful framework. Thank you very much, Nasser. And hope to see you, inshallah ta'ala, tomorrow. We conclude our today's session, and hope to see you tomorrow, inshallah. We'll be starting again at 9 with the one-to-one sessions outside, and then we'll start the actual opening speech at 9:50, inshallah ta'ala. See you tomorrow, bi'idhnillah. Shukran jazeelan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.